ticket, Alexis.
Or just breathing hard. I'm sorry. I've had 2 beers.
Hi everyone, welcome to this year's See and Learn 2022. We will be starting in just 5 minutes. Thank you for your patience.
It's on, isn't it? The light's on. How do I know if I'm on? Sorry. Welcome, everybody. We're going to be a few minutes because we're waiting for our government official to come and officially open us. But while we're waiting, you can certainly buy raffle tickets. You can order a drink, support our sponsor. For those of you that it's your first time here, our raffle tickets are something you're going to hear a lot about if you come to more than one event. We have two guys here who won the raffle last year. So we have great prizes from wonderful places to stay to things like tennis lessons, a knife, Joe Bean glass. Help me out, ladies. A book, Marie's jewelry, all kinds of different things that you'll see on the slides. We use the raffle money for all the things we're not funded for, from bringing in our assistants, who I'll introduce you to shortly, paying our accountant to do an annual report, moving the chairs, moving you. So when you go to any type of field project or when we bring the experts to our schools, all those things cost money. So your raffle tickets help support that. So thank you. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. We're ready. We're ready. Okay, we are ready, everybody. Woo! Welcome, everyone, to See and Learn 2022. We started See and Learn in 2003, so this should be our 20th annual event, but it's our 19th because of COVID. So you have to come back next year for the 20th. Okay? Yay. So I'm going to start by just introducing the See and Learn team because you'll be seeing them throughout the month. Most of you know Emily, but for those of you who don't, that's Emily. You'll be seeing plenty of her. And a nice warm welcome to our new addition, which is Alexis. And we're going to be doing lots of thank yous and such throughout the month, but I know everybody's anxious to get started. So to officially open See and Learn 2022, I would like to introduce you to our esteemed Secretary of the Island of Saba, Mr. Tim Muller.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to everyone. What would Saba be without See and Learn? To be honest with you, very important that we have this yearly event organized with the different stakeholders. As government, you always try to do things for the entire island, for the entire community. And you can't do that alone. You have to do that with the different stakeholders. And with having ambitions in the tourism sector, in the nature preservation, you need strong stakeholders and very interested community. Community here on island, but also community abroad. Experts, expats, tourists, and all of you I see here together. And that's really great. A warm applause for yourself, please. As usual, we will have a beautiful week, beautiful days, where we get insight in different aspects of marine life, in life that we see here on the rock, that we take for granted, but what we shouldn't take for granted. It needs our attention. And that's why I think it's very important to be not only here tonight, but also visit the other days, so that we get a bit more insight in those things. And I really, really want to thank Lynn and her team. Thank you very much. An applause for them. And with that, See and Learn 2022 is opened. Thank you.
All right, welcome to Long Haul, everybody. Yay! Okay, next. Here's our introductory video. Okay, yes, round of applause, great video. Adam does a great job, of course. He's our tech guy sitting in the back, so we should give him a round of applause as well. All right, and of course we want to thank all of our sponsors, some of which are here tonight. We have Jo Bean sitting right here. She's also a raffle prize donor, yes, yes. We have some cottage owners here. I think Marie is in the back somewhere. She's donating, yes, bracelets. So we'd like to thank everyone for that. Of course, we would like to thank CaribTrans. Our live streaming would not be possible without CaribTrans, so they get a big round of applause. Yes. We'd also like to give a big round of applause to Prince Bernhard Culture Funds and public entity SEBA for supporting us for 20 years. We do have some upcoming events. As you know, our next presentation is October 3rd at Shea Booba. We have a presentation every other night throughout the month of October, going through the 27th. So the next one will be at Shea Booba, and the presenter will be Chancey McDonald, who is right over here. Chancey, give a wave. And then on Wednesday, we have our next presenter, Allison Robertson, who is also in the audience tonight. Allison, give a wave. And then every other night, we also have field projects going on. So tomorrow, you can dive with Theresa in the afternoon at 1:30 to play a game of Fish I Spy. Try to find little cryptobenthic fish that are hiding in the corals. And then on, what day are we on? Tuesday, we have Chancey's field project, where we're going to be going at a little bit deeper depths to look at the fish assemblages there, and then compare that to what it looks like at shallower depths. So my slides got a little mixed up, so we're just going to skip through. Theresa and Chancey are staying at the beautiful Solera Dunya, so give them a round of applause for sponsoring. All right. And like I said before, Prince Bernhard, public entity SEBA, thank you. And a big thank you to all of our sponsors. We have like 57 or 58 this year, so we have quite a few sponsors this year, so that's great. One way you can do to help us is to leave us a review. We are listed on Great Nonprofits website, so it's a free, easy way for you to support us. It helps us with our funders and future donors. Takes 5 minutes. Just go on to greatnonprofits.org and leave us a short review. We would greatly appreciate it. And as Lynn mentioned, we have raffle tickets on sale all month long. They're $5 a piece. We have lots of wonderful prizes, and the final draw will be on October 27th. I think I covered the upcoming events at a glance, but if anyone wants to take a picture, we have the dive tomorrow at 1:30, 5:30 presentation on Monday, another dive at 1:30 on Tuesday, and we have even more events coming up after that, so stay tuned. And now tonight, our keynote speaker is Theresa Rueger. And very similar to Save a Living, our opening presenter, Dr. Theresa Rueger, also comes from a small rural town in Germany. Sometimes being in such close proximities to your friends and family is a good thing. But how close is too close? This evening, we will be learning just how close these tiny little fish families and ecosystems are. Theresa's work entails research in finding out if fish live with their relatives, why they live in groups, and why there's such great diversity of the mating systems in coral reef fishes. Theresa also teaches university courses and helps with a local education program in Papua New Guinea. She loves snorkeling, diving, of course, and sharing this information with you guys. So that is also why she is here tonight. So we'd like to give a warm welcome to our first presenter of See and Learn 2022, Theresa Rueger.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. So nice to be here. Just arrived last night, but what a beautiful island you have here, and what a really special thing to be a part of. See and Learn, and to be the opening speaker is amazing. I hope I'll do a good job. A little bit of jet lag there still, so bear with me. So let's see if this clicker works. Where do I need to go? There you go. This way? Here we go. Okay, this is a sweet spot. I'm just going to hold my hand here the whole time. All right, so I'm from the University of Newcastle, all the way in the UK. That's where I work. I do my research and my teaching there. And my research mainly concerns the secret love life of coral reef fishes. So I'm interested in their mating systems and their social systems and what's going on in those corals. So we'll talk about that today. As a tropical ecologist, I'm lucky enough to call these kind of places my office. Tropical coral reefs, you get them all over the world, all across the equator in shallow waters. You have some really nice ones around here. I'm going to go diving for the first time tomorrow, so I'm really looking forward to that. And the special thing about coral reef ecosystems is that they are built by these really amazing animals, corals, right? Stony corals. You probably all knew that they're animals, and they're really strange animals because corals are actually made up of hundreds to thousands of these individual animals. So one coral colony is actually made up of clones of these single coral polyps that we can see when we zoom in. And if we have a look at coral polyps a little bit closer, and see that they're really strange animals, right? So they don't have faces or anything, but they do have these tentacles, and they can catch plankton with them and bring it to their mouths. They also have symbiotic algae, so they can do photosynthesis and get energy from the sun. And when we look at a dissection of a polyp here, you can again see these tentacles, and they can catch the plankton, bring it to their stomach, and get lots of energy from that. And you can see here as well that the polyps really actually sit on top of their skeleton that they're building. And so these little clonal animals are building these amazing ecosystems. And the ecosystems are home to thousands of crabs and worms and coral reef fishes. And coral reef fishes is what I'm really interested in. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and colors. And it turns out that their love life and their social life is quite interesting as well. There's some things that they all have in common, and a couple of things that they do very differently, and some things that they do very differently from what we do on land. So one thing that they all have in common is they all lay eggs, and the fertilization of those eggs happens in the water. So the female releases the eggs into the water, and the male releases the sperm, and the fertilization happens in the water. There's two types of eggs for those coral reef fishes. For one, we have what we call demersal eggs. So these are eggs that the fish glue onto the substrate. So they might glue it onto a coral or a bit of stone, or in this case, a sea whip. And you can see actually the little embryos in the egg cases staring right back at you here. So these kind of eggs are usually laid when the parents take care of them. On the other hand, you also have broadcast spawners. So here's an example of a bunch of surgeonfish, and they're gathering here to make their babies. This white stuff that you can see in the water here, that's all the egg and all the sperm that is released into the water. And the eggs get fertilized there, and then they float away, never to be seen again. So these are the coral reef fishes that do not take care of their offspring. No matter whether they come from eggs that are on the substrate or from eggs in the water column, when coral reef fishes hatch, they go on to what we call the dispersive larval phase. This is something that almost all coral reef fishes do, with a couple of exceptions. And what happens is that these little fish hatch, and they go out into the open ocean. So it's not like they get out of their eggs and just squirrel away into the reef and hide away, but they actually go out into the open ocean. And I always found this really confusing, because when I think of the open ocean, I think of these kind of creatures, right? Like, why would you go into the open ocean instead of hiding on a reef where it would feel much safer? So any ideas why they would go into the open ocean rather than on the reef?
Because those won't eat them.
Why not?
They're too small.
Exactly. So if you're a tiny little fish larvae, and this comparison doesn't even work, right? If I would put them into the right size, you wouldn't see them on the screen. these larvae are less than a centimeter long. So all those big predators out there in the open ocean, they wouldn't even see them, let alone like recognize them as food. So if you're little larvae, you're much better off with the big predators out there in the open ocean rather than being on the reef where the predators are the perfect size to have you for dinner, right? So they go out into the open ocean and they eat as much plankton as they can, and they grow and they transform in that larval dispersal phase. So that phase can last a couple of weeks to a couple of months. So they do spend a serious amount of time out there. And they do this metamorphosis from these little weirdly blobbed larvae to the kind of fish that we're more familiar with. Once they've gone through this change, and they're about a centimeter long at this point, they then have to find a reef to settle into, right? When they have to find these reefs to settle, they're faced with these predators again, the right-sized predators to eat them. And they're also faced with a lot of competition. So on the reef, all of the corals might already be occupied, all of the little crevices might be occupied, so they might have trouble finding that spot that is safe. And so that's why we estimate out of those recruits, only 1 in about 10,000 makes it to be an adult and to reproduce themselves. So it's really, really harsh life when you're a coral reef fish larvae. But actually, we wanted to talk about these adults and their love life, right? So let's get to that. Some coral reef fishes live in this very classic pair of a male and a female. They defend a territory together and they stay together, like these butterfly fishes. A lot of butterfly fishes do that. Interestingly, we actually find about 1/5 of those pairs to be homosexual. So just very similar to human societies, 1/5 is either male-male or female-female. And these fish stay together for years, so they only mate with each other exclusively, so they're really monogamous. But that's only one way to do it. There's many other ways to do it, and coral reef fishes certainly take advantage of the whole range of ways to do it. So while some of them are monogamous, I'm really not doing well with these slides, some do it very differently, like these blue-headed wrasse, for example, where the females try to find the best possible male at any given time. So the females, they produce the eggs, right? So they're investing a lot into the offspring. The eggs are pretty costly to produce. They're quite large. Like, producing eggs takes something. So they want to make sure that they have the best possible male at any given time. The males, on the other hand, are trying to get as many females as possible because sperm turns out pretty cheap to produce. You want to spread it as wide as possible. And an interesting thing, what happens on the reef that we might not know from terrestrial ecosystems, is that throughout their lives, these wrasses actually change from a female to a male. So they take up both roles at some point in their life. They start out as females, these nice, bright yellow ones, really interested in finding the best quality male. And then they go through sex change throughout their lives, and as they grow older and larger, they become males, and then try to impress as many females as possible. Another funny thing about these wrasses is that this is not the only way to go. So this is one life you could choose. Another life you could choose is you could go from a female to a male, but you stay looking like a female. And we call these sneaker males, and hopefully I'll be able to explain why we call them sneakers. So in the blue-headed wrasse, we have the females hanging out with each other and these big, fancy, colorful males that invest a lot in their color, having these competitions with each other. And usually it's the biggest one that wins, right? And he gets to go up with the lady and start the mating process. And when she's happy with him, sorry, I'm not doing well with the slides. When she's happy with him, she releases her eggs. No. And he releases the sperm, right? Fertilization happens in the water, we already learned. And the egg is fertilized, and everything's well. Now, these sneaker males, because they look like females, they can get really close in with the action. So this male doesn't know that this is another male. So he's unbothered, he's concentrated on the female. And now when the female releases her eggs, for this big fancy male, of course, because he's done the fighting, he's done the investment in the color, and the big male releases his sperm, the sneaker male releases the sperm at this exact same time. And so without investing in the competition, in the color, in anything at all, he does get some fertilizations out of it. And that's why we call them sneakers. Very sneaky way to do it. So most of the offspring here will still be from the main fancy male, but some will definitely be from that sneaker male. But being either really fancy and flamboyant or sneaking is not the only ways to do it. On the reef, we also have very dedicated fathers in coral reef fishes. One example that you no doubt know are seahorses. So seahorses carry the eggs, the fertilized eggs of their mate in their brood pouch, and they'll have them in there until they hatch. Now, how many of you, I'm sure that all of you have heard about seahorses and these male pregnancies, but how many of you have seen them give birth? So, so hopefully this will work. Could you try to... No, there's a video there. Yeah, awesome. So this is a male, he's heavily pregnant, he's starting to breathe really heavily, right, getting ready, and then the contractions start. I mean, he's really, really putting a lot of work into this. And there they come, all the babies. So many of them. And somebody commented earlier, it really looks like he's sneezing them out at this point. Like, oof, all right. And then the only thing to do is just to sink to the bottom and have a rest. But, there's another... Yeah, that female's already ready again to go again. So while he was pregnant, right, and he was taking care of those embryos, she was producing more eggs. So now he has to go again immediately. All right, so we've talked a lot about a lot of things, sneakers and sex change and male pregnancies, and I just want to have a little bit of see whether anybody has any questions so far. Yep. Yes?
Do the sneaker women, do they choose to become sneakers, or how does that work?
Good, very good question. So it's two different strategies, right? Oh yes, I'll repeat the question for the live stream. The question was whether the females that become sneakers, whether there's a choice there or whether it's sort of a stochastic event or something like that. So what happens is they can either become these really flamboyant males or the sneaker males. It probably depends on population density. So how many other males are around? Do I actually have a chance to become a successful sort of flamboyant male having these fights? Or are there so many of those that I'm better off being a sneaker, at least for a little while, can blend in with the females, get a couple of fertilizations that way, while I wait for some of those breeding tenures of the big flamboyant males to be over and take their place. Does that make sense?
It does, but it sounds like it's a conscious choice in the fish.
Conscious choice, well, I'm not sure that all that thought process happens, but they do know how many others of their own species are around them. They can sense that. And that might influence their hormones, yes? So it doesn't really need to be sort of conscious thought for these decisions to be based on a lot of different factors that they can take. Yeah. Another question over there?
So when the sneaker male is successful, is that offspring any different than a fully grown flamboyant male?
Oh, another great question. The question was whether when the sneaker is successful, is that offspring different from the offspring of these flamboyant, sort of colorful males? I don't actually know. Might be a great PhD thesis for somebody, if anybody's interested in becoming a marine ecologist. Yeah? The question was whether they stay sneakers. They can become the flamboyant males as well. So they can stay sneakers and then become flamboyant males later on. All right, one more question. Okay, over the...
Kind of a strange question, but is there any way that you can think of to introduce local species to go after the lionfish, river and lionfish eggs?
Yes, so the question was whether I can link this to the local species that eat the lionfish eggs.
Is there a way, like, to reduce the number of lionfish on the reef to introduce the local species to consume the lionfish eggs?
Okay, whether you could train the local species to consume the lionfish eggs? Yeah, so these wrasses actually are really keen on eggs, but the problem is that lionfish don't lay those demersal eggs, but they do the broadcast spawning, so they don't take care of the eggs. So the eggs are not localized in a spot where a wrasse could come and eat all the eggs, unfortunately. They put their eggs into the water column, they don't take care of them, and so once they're in the water column, those wrasses have no chance of getting them. Imagine like trying to get a single egg in sort of the ocean. Yeah, it's a really great idea, but unfortunately with the lionfish in particular, it wouldn't work.
So we have to train the great whites.
Yeah, exactly. Keep training those great whites. All right. All right, so in the second part of... sorry.
No, sorry.
Okay. In the second part, I wanted to talk about a few species that I work with in my research. So one are anemone fish. They have a really cool relationship with their anemone. Then there's some gobies that I work with. They have really great sort of size hierarchies in their groups. And then the first one I want to talk about is the cardinal fish, because we just saw the seahorses giving birth, and that was really cool. But the cardinal fish really take that one step further, that whole being a dedicated dad, because they have the eggs in their mouth until they hatch. So here's a very dedicated father having the brood in his mouth. The whole time he cannot eat, he has trouble breathing, his swimming is compromised, so it's a very dedicated father. I have a picture of them hatching here as well. So they really stay in his mouth until they hatch. And then they go on into the open water, right, and do their larval dispersal phase journey. Now, I study these fish, and they live in groups, so I have to tell them apart somehow. And I do that by giving them tattoos underwater. So I catch them with clove oil. Has anybody heard of clove oil? It's an anesthetic, actually. So you can put it into like very diluted form. You can put it into spray bottles, take it underwater, and then spray it out. It's these white clouds, and the fish breathe it in, and they go really slow and wonky. And then you can catch them with hand nets. Otherwise, I'm way too slow. So you can catch them with hand nets, and I put them into plastic bags just to hold them. And then to give them the tattoos, I use, so all of this is happening underwater, I use these little insulin syringes that you can hopefully see here. And there's like a gooey sort of yellow color in there at the moment. And so I go under the first under the scales and under the first couple of layers of skin and draw these lines. And this is what that result looks like. So now you can actually see why they're called pajama cardinal fish, because they look like they're wearing pajama pants. And you can see these lines that I drew on them to individually mark them. So there's five different positions on the fish and 6 different colors, so I can get thousands and thousands of combinations of these fish. So this one, for example, would be pink, orange 2, and this one would be called green, green 3. So that's how I tell them apart. And by telling them apart, I can actually go and see before I started my PhD, we really didn't know anything about their mating system or their social system. So now we can start exploring, do they actually, are they monogamous like these butterfly fish, or is there some sneaking going on, all of those things. And what I found by doing these behavioral studies over several months and years, really, is that they do form these monogamous pairs within their groups. So it's usually one female and one male, and they stay together for months or even years. They exclusively mate with each other. At least that's what I found when I looked at the behavior. But, you know, that doesn't make for a great PhD thesis. I mean, that's barely one chapter, if anything. So what I did is I double-checked. And I double-checked by doing the genetics. So we can do molecular analysis, so DNA fingerprinting, and we can take each single embryo of those clutches, and we can match it to the father and the mother. So then we can ask, behaviorally, we see that you're monogamous, but is that really what's going on? So is it really only that male and that female that produce these offspring? And it turns out, and I probably wouldn't tell you the story if it wasn't the case, that that's not the case. So everybody's a cheater. All right. So it turns out that some of these clutches, it's not just that, you know, female and that one male, but it turns out there's another female in there. So there's the clutch that the male has in his mouth, and there's actually two different females. And we can't see these behaviors because a lot of them happen at night, but I like imagining this male that already has a clutch in his mouth and this female shimmying up to him and saying, hey, do you want some more? And what he has to do to get these extra eggs in his mouth is swallow some of the existing eggs. But I told you that he's not eating, right, the whole time that he's brooding. So what he gets out of it is he still has a full mouth of eggs, but he also gets a snack. So that's what he gets out of it. All right, and then even more surprising, we actually found different males in there as well. So this is a male, and he's got embryos in his mouth, and some of them are not his own. So there's some sneaking going on from the female side and some sneaking going on the male side. So, you know, complex stuff. It's not always what it seems on coral reefs, that's for sure. And then I want to talk about another one of my study species, the emerald coral goby, easily identified by the very grumpy look on his face. Beautiful fish, very small actually, only about 2.5 centimeters. So if you want to see fish like that, you really have to look very deeply into the coral and see what's going on. They live in branching corals all their lives. And within these corals, they have quite complex group structures. So we've got the largest individual that is always the male, and then we've got this very strict size hierarchy where the second largest is the female, and then the fish get progressively smaller. The only ones that reproduce are the two largest individuals, so only the male and the female, the two biggest ones, make babies. Everybody else does not, and that is a bit of a question from an evolutionary standpoint that we'll get to in a second. When the male dies, God forbid, most of the time they're eaten, they're very small. What happens in the size hierarchy is that everybody moves up one step. So the female becomes the male, so we've got that sex change again, not uncommon on coral reefs, right? Female becomes the male, and then we've got the smaller fish, one of the smaller fish that moves up to become the female to replace them. Similar to our cardinal fish and our seahorses, these are also very dedicated dads. They do glue the eggs onto their coral, and then they take care of them, so they defend them from predators, they aerate them, all of that. So, as I alluded to just now, what's interesting about it is that when we think of this from an evolutionary standpoint, we think that everybody should have as much offspring as possible, right? So everybody tries to get as many copies of themselves, of their own genes, into the next generation. But in this case, we only have these two dominant breeders that get any offspring at all. And we have all these subordinates hanging around not having offspring. So what's going on there? Why do these subordinates accept their situation being in these big groups? And it turns out that one of the things we found is that there's simply nowhere else to go. So they arrive from their larval dispersal phase, right? They arrive on the reef, and it turns out that all of the corals that are good for them are already occupied because some other goby figured out it's good coral, we can occupy this. So the best thing they can do is join one of these groups, and you're going to join at the very bottom of the hierarchy if you just came out of your larval phase. And then they are in these groups, and they're at the very bottom of the rung, and the best thing they can do is wait to inherit this territory. So as these older fish might pass away, those younger fish move up the hierarchy. This might take years, but their best chance is finding an existing group, joining at the bottom of the hierarchy, and then just waiting around to breed themselves, right? So eventually they might become the female, and then if they wait long enough, they become the male. But then there's the other side of this is, why do these dominant breeders accept these little guys in their group? So they're sharing their space, they're sharing their resources. Why would they do that? Well, one of the reasons turns out they're slightly related. So they're not very related, as in these little guys are not their children or their siblings. But they might be something like distant cousins or great-grandchildren, and that might be enough motivation to keep them in these groups. Another thing I'm studying right now is that it might have to do with these mutualisms that they have with their coral. So the fish live in these corals, and they provide nutrients for the coral by pooing and peeing in it. They defend it from the predators, and the coral provides space to hide from predators and also space to lay their eggs. So it's a really nice mutualistic relationship. Now, by keeping these little fish around, the breeders might make it so that the coral is bigger and healthier, and a bigger, healthier coral might mean that you have bigger, healthier breeders, but that's yet to be decided. All right, very last fish I want to talk about is this guy here, the most famous of all coral reef fishes, Amphibian percula, the clown anemone fish, or Nemos. They also live in groups, and within those groups, they also have a size hierarchy. Excuse me. In this case, the biggest fish is not the male, but the female. The second biggest is the male. And then everybody else, again, a non-breeding subordinate. So very similar, actually, to what we just saw with the gobies, even though the gobies are very different fish. Another thing that's very similar to the gobies is that they have a very tight mutualism with their cnidarian host, in this case, sea anemones. So the fish and the anemones, they protect each other from predators, they share nutrients, all of that. And they also provide parental care, similar to the gobies, the cardinal fish, the seahorses. We have a lot of good dads on the reef. They take care of those eggs, demersal eggs, right, that they glued onto the substrate here. So, but that's pretty much the only thing that the movie got right. So remember how the movie Marlin takes care of those eggs, and they got that right. Otherwise, there's not a lot that fits. For example, in the beginning, you remember how that big barracuda eats Nemo's mom? It's really tragic, but it's never going to happen, because that barracuda is looking at these anemone fish pretty similar to how that shark is looking at these larvae, right? There's a lot of other fish in the food chain between that small anemone fish and that giant barracuda. And then the movie goes on saying, it's Marlin and Nemo living in the anemone, so it's a father and son sort of situation. But when Nemo hatched out of his egg, remember, he would have gone during his larval dispersal phase, right? For several months, actually. So Nemo would have been away in the big open ocean, and what would have happened to Marlin in the meantime? Well, he would have turned into Marlena. Because anemone fish also do the sex change thing, but the other way around. So they start off as males, and then as they go bigger and larger and they get to that biggest, highest rank of the hierarchy, they become females. So start out with this situation, right? The biggest one is the female. Second biggest one is the male, and they reproduce together, they make babies together. And then if the female passes away, the male becomes the female, and whatever other fish is in there becomes the male that this female is going to reproduce with. So then when we think back to Nemo and Marlin, well, anyway, they didn't get that right, and I'm not sure anybody thought that through. It's not the Disney story that you want, I don't think. It's still a cute story, that's true. All right, so conclusions. Life's hard, right? Especially if you're a coral reef fish. If you're in that larval phase, it's really tough out there. Things are not always what they seem. Lots of sneakers out there. All else fails, let the dads do it. Lots of dedicated fathers on the reefs, right? And Nemo's dad was a woman. So that's it for me. I hope you have some questions. All right. Yeah, take questions.
Hi, I had a chance to dive in the Pacific with clownfish and came across an anemone with some absolutely tiny.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they came from the open ocean and found a home there. How were they not stung and eaten by the anemone when they showed up and joined this established family?
Great question. So the question was that this gentleman here has observed some anemone fish in the Indo-Pacific and has seen these very tiny recruits in the anemone, coming out of the larval dispersal phase. And the question is, how did they not get stung and eaten by the anemone immediately when they arrive, right? That is a great question. They actually do have to be quite careful when they first arrive. They do build up, you might have heard of this mucus layer that they use to not actually get eaten by the anemone. So the anemone does eat fish all the time, but the anemone fish have a special mucus layer that they use they do feel the stings, we think, but they don't get paralyzed and eaten by the anemone. So they build up that mucus layer relatively quickly. But you do see them, if maybe you've observed this, that they're often actually around the bottom around the foot of the anemone. So they also have to make sure that they don't get eaten by the bigger fish. So it's still a pretty hard life. Like once they found this anemone, it can still take months to actually establish themselves into the group.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'll take one here, yeah, in the middle row. The gentleman with the gray shirt, yeah.
Your tattoos that you put on the fish, doesn't that change their social interaction with non-tattooed fish?
Yes, good question. The question was about the tattoos that I talked about that I put on the fish, whether that changes the social interaction with the fish that are not tattooed. And we've actually checked that because we had this, somebody at some point had that same thought, which is a smart thought. We checked both the predation rate as well, because we put these neon colors on these little fish and you'd think that, maybe they get eaten more, but that's not the case. And we also checked things like how successful are they finding mates. So do the other fish sort of recognize that there's something weird going on with you? But they don't. So nothing that we measured so far has actually changed. So it seems to be a good method. And they keep those tattoos for a long time. So these fish are actually quite long-lived. They probably live for up to about 10 years. And they do keep these tattoos for a long time. Yeah. There's another question way in the back.
Two-parter. Does the hierarchical system, if one of the people in the hierarchy or one of the fish in the hierarchy gets eaten, how long does it take to replace that individual in the hierarchy? And have you ever observed where maybe two individuals are eaten, the hierarchy falls apart?
Great questions. So the questions were a two-parter. One, how long it takes for that newly free part in the hierarchy to be replaced. So this is then a question about how long does it take the fish to either mature into a female male, or to do the sex change. And then the other part of the question was what happens if both of the breeders, both of the top of the hierarchy, die at the same time or get eaten at the same time. So for the first part, it takes them around 6 months to sex change, but this is different so it takes the anemone fish about 6 months, and takes the gobies less time than that. The anemone fish are very long-lived, so they've got all the time in the world to do anything. And in that time, their gonads actually turn to, so their sexual reproductive organs actually sort of turn to goo and sort of reassemble themselves. It's just as miraculous as what happens with butterflies, right? In their pupae, like it's basically sort of goo, and it sort of assembles itself. It's amazing. And if both of the male and the female sort of would die, it depends on how close the subordinates are, the smaller non-breeders are in size to each other. If they're very close in size, the smaller one might try to pick a fight to get that female position immediately. But these size hierarchies, generally, they go all the way down. So you have the female, and then the male is exactly 80% of the female, because that's when he can't possibly win the fight anymore. And the individual after that is exactly 80% of the male, because that's when they exactly can't win that fight anymore. And we've done these studies, right? So there's colleagues of mine have pitched them against each other to see like where's that size where they exactly can't win the fight, and that's exactly what they get to. Because otherwise the bigger fish beat them up. So in that hierarchy is maintained by the fish that are on top of it, right? So the female beats everybody up in that group. Like, you stay a male, you don't become anything. You know, like she's really the boss here. In the anemone fish, in the gobies, it's the male. Yeah. I hope that one answers your question. Yeah. Yeah.
Do the smaller ones, when they are born, do they already have sex in the sea? Anything like that?
Yeah, good question. So the question was whether the small ones, when they're born or when they hatch, whether they already have a sex, and whether we can see that histologically on their gonads. No, they don't have a sex, so they're not matured, but they do have to, even if the anemone is empty, for example, in the anemone fish case, and they could theoretically jump straight to female, they do go through something like a male phase. So it's not going to be a functional male, so he's never going to produce any sperm. But we can see in the gonads that it looks like male gonads for a little while as it changes into the female. So it's pretty interesting. It does seem to have some genetic code saying you need to go through this male phase first before you become the female. And the small ones can't be sexually mature because otherwise they get kicked out of the group. So the big breeders really keep an eye on them. They make sure they don't get too big, they make sure they don't develop their gonads, otherwise it's out of the group. And for both the gobies and the anemone fish, that means certain death. They cannot make it out there. The gobies are way too small, they're going to get eaten immediately. And the anemone fish, they're also relatively small, and they're really bad swimmers too, so they don't make it out there. Good motivation to stay in place. Yeah. Yeah?
Where do the cardinal fish come from?
Where do they come from? What do you mean?
Geographically.
So the pajama cardinal fish is an Indo-Pacific species, but you have a lot of cardinal fish around here too. So cardinal fish are actually one of the most widespread marine fish species. There's about 280 different species. They're not only on coral reefs either, they're in the deep sea, they're in sort of the subpolar regions. They're pretty, so that strategy of keeping your eggs in your mouth seems to really work really well for them. But yeah, there's a few here. Most of the ones you have around Saba are so this reddish color, which is why they're called cardinal fish. And they have really big eyes. To see them, you have to look into the crevices and under ledges, because they come out at night, actually, so they're nocturnal fish, which is why they have these huge eyes, and yeah.
The pictures that you have of the cardinal fish, where did they come from?
From Papua New Guinea, which is my main field site. Yeah. Yeah.
About halfway through your presentation, you were talking about how, I don't know whether it was the male or the female, was protecting the baby fish from predators. How do they do that?
Yeah, so both the gobies and the anemone fish do this, actually. So they don't have them in any pouch sorry, repeat the question. The question was about the protection that the parents provide the embryos and how they do that. So both the gobies and the cardinal fish do this. And they do it by being really brave in the end. So the gobies they only have to deal with the fish that are small enough to come into their corals, luckily, right? But the anemone fish actually have to deal with relatively large fish. And a lot of the time they have to deal with these wrasses, you know, those bluehead wrasses we talked about a lot. I mean, anyway, they're not my favorite fish. Because they come in and they eat those eggs like all the time. And they're quite a lot larger than those anemone fish, but the anemone fish, they just go for it. They have this really, I wish I had a video to show you, but they have this karate kick type of behavior where they swim really fast at whatever is coming at them, and then they turn super quickly, so it's like this whip of their tail. And they do this at sharks, at literal sort of white-tip reef sharks. I have seen them do this. They're very brave when it comes to defending their enemy and defending their home. And I think they get that bravery because they know they can just dart back into the enemy and just sort of wait out the consequences. But so that's how they do it. Sheer bravery. Okay, just one more. All right, the question was about the shape of the hierarchy, basically. So is there lots of fish at the bottom or not? And it turns out that actually both for the gobies and the anemone fish, it's only groups from about 3 to maybe up to 13 individuals or something. So it's not a lot of fish down there at the bottom of the hierarchy. And you can imagine why, because the biggest fish for an anemone fish is about this large, right? And then you go sort of 80% of that, and it's like this big. And then you go 80% of that, and it's this big. And then you're already at rank 4. And by the time you're at rank 5, you're talking about a fish that's only this big, and that's about how big they are when they're recruits. So there's simply no space at the bottom of the hierarchy to allow more fish. And the fish will kick out any new recruits that come in. So that they're just like, sorry, we're full, and try your luck somewhere else. So they're very, the Hawaiian shirt over there. Love your shirt.
Do we know how far the juveniles go out into the open ocean, and do they return to the same coral reef, or is it a random choice?
The question was about the larval dispersal phase and how far these fish go, whether we know that, and whether they return to the same reef or if it's a random choice. Great question. Marine biologists have been trying to figure this out for many decades now. We can't follow them, right? Like, they're too small. We can't put tags on them. We can't like physically sort of swim after them. They're very see-through, although people have tried. So the best we can do is take those genetic markers, catch a bunch of the recruits that return back to the reef and match them to all the adults on the reef, and then see how far did they go. Are they from the same reef, from the same anemone, from the same coral, or did they go a long distance? That's the best we have come up with so far. And it turns out that some of them go huge distances. So these are fish that are less than a centimeter small, and they go 100 kilometers. But it also turns out that some of them end up on the same exact reef that they're from. And we think that that's not a coincidence either. So while they can't swim against the ocean current, we now think that they can swim well enough to choose a current to be in. Their hearing is very good. They have very good sense of smell. So it could be that they imprinted from their egg phase, right, that they imprinted to the reef that they're in, that they came from. They smell that reef in one of the currents. They can swim to that current and then let that current do most of the work to get back home. But we're still figuring out, is it the parents? If the parents are doing really well, would they produce more larvae that would come back to that same reef where conditions are clearly good? Or if they're doing really poorly, would they produce more larvae that go sort of further afield? And we're still figuring out all of those things. But lots of PhDs to do there, so if anybody wants to become a marine biologist, do it.
Are the sneaker fish called sneakers because they're very sneaky?
The question was whether the sneaker fish have sneakers because they're very sneaky. Yes. I love that question. Okay. All right. Let's chat more over beer.
Theresa will be around all week. She'll also be having dinner here, as will Chancey. So if you have any more questions, stick around. Support Long Haul. Have some more drinks. Have some more food. Thank you, Long Haul. And we need to clean up, so if you guys can kind of clear out a little bit, help us move the chairs, that'd be great. Thank you. All right.
In the freight logistics industry, Carib Trans has served the Caribbean region for more than 30 years, with a footprint that has grown from one island to now serving the majority, as well as Central and South America. Carib Trans is an NVOCC, a non-vessel operating common carrier, meaning it has the same responsibilities as a shipper without owning the vessels or planes. Its primary customers, individuals who ship clothing, electronics, and other personal items, and occasionally cars.
Most of the stuff that they're sending is because they don't get it there. So for us to provide it on two services, air and ocean, we can give it a choice of how fast you want it. So if you want it really fast, we're gonna send it by air, you're gonna have it next day, sometimes even the same day.
That on-time service has been the key to Carib Trans' success, whether shipping by air or by sea. The company moves about 5,000 TEUs of freight each year, more than any NVOCC in the region. And since it joined the Saltchuk family of transportation companies a couple years ago, Carib Trans can offer customers even more shipping options.
Other NVOCCs, they depend on other shipping lines that are not part of their family. So they need